Aquilo. Chapter 14. A spell generations in the making. On pins and needles, and at the edge of my seat, are the shared metaphors that describe my listening to the little slice of history shared by Mayor Byrne. Don't think I've forgotten the dire warning by Veronique Lagacé about their role as witch hunters. You try to ignore someone painting such a target on your forehead and tell me how that works out. But I do make allowances for the possibility that she was also just trying to scare me off. Whatever else can be said about these two women who share custody of both the political and supernatural future of Aquilo, one thing is easy to see. They're friends. Dear friends. And how can they not be? The same way my friendship, if you could call it that, with Agnes was forged in the bloody crucible of trauma, I suspect these two have seen just as much together, if not more. However, for the time being, Mayor Byrne is engrossed with the telling of Aquilo's history, and even Lagacé's baleful glare isn't enough to distract me. Between the years of 1705 and 1853, Marie Byrne begins, Aquilo held an annual harvest festival. Mind you, back then the town wasn't called Aquilo, and what we think of as the village of Saint-Elodie was actually about a mile north of Aquilo's downtown. I'm sorry, I interrupt. Saint-Elodie? The closest thing to a name Aquilo had before it became Aquilo. It's Mayor Lagacé who provides the explanation. The edge in her voice remains, but where one might expect, based on her previous attitude, that it would be to hurry things up, instead she seems to be participating in the telling of the tale. Meanwhile, Thomas Sinclair remains blissfully quiet, accompanying the story with only the furious scribbling of his pen. Exactly, Byrne agrees. Oddly, as far as I can tell, the name isn't inspired by the Christian saint, but rather a name given to a local woman. Perhaps the founder's wife. Anyway, the name Aquilo only comes later when the U.S. side of the city is incorporated in 1898. Fascinating, Thomas says, flipping to a fresh page. And yes, I guess it is interesting information from an academic point of view, but we're also getting way off target, getting lost in the side dishes at the expense of the main course, so to speak. I have a feeling that, if not kept on course, we could easily be here all night, jumping from one tangent to the next, flitting through the history of this corner of the world until we all die from thirst, hunger, or old age. Marie Byrne has that spark in her eyes. You know the one. That glitter of someone passionate about something. I see it in Thomas's eyes when he talks about what branch of the government is coming after him next. It's in Olivia's eyes when she goes on and on about apples and apple juice and apple fritters. Mostly, I recognize it in my own eyes when I catch a glimpse of myself in the bottom of a stainless steel bowl, about to pour in batter to be mixed. Mayor Byrne is a politician third, a demon hunter second, and a historian first. Makes me wonder which came first. About the festivals, I mention, trying to remain polite. Ah, yes. She thankfully gets back on track. So, harvest festivals were popular pretty much everywhere back then. Different communities gave them different names and different levels of importance. To some, there were times to thank the Lord for a bountiful harvest before the cold season. Think of it as a proto-Thanksgiving without the colonial undertones. To others, it was a way to have one final feast before months of careful rationing of provisions as snow and ice took over the landscape. To Saint-Elodie, it was somewhere in between the two, though there's reason to believe that it wasn't the Christian god that was thanked on the occasion, but rather forest spirits and other heathen deities. There's no real scorn when she says heathen deities, but also little in the way of respect. Maybe she's just being clinical about the subject. Whatever it is, there's something about the way she speaks the words that hits differently from how I'd expect a devout Christian or fervent Wiccan to say them. There are plenty of stories about these festivals, she continues. During years when Saint Elodie's harvest was too poor, they'd ask for the help of other neighboring communities and settlements, exchanging livestock for grain and vegetables. It's counterintuitive, but it's recorded that during those times, Saint Elodie would invite outsiders and ply them with a feast, straining their resources to the limit in a show of goodwill and friendship. Other years, the opposite would be true, and some of the largest farms would take their surplus on the road, trading it for goods, often at a loss, or taking in children and whole families from neighboring farms for the winter. Thomas shuffles, flipping to a fresh page, but also raising a hand like a child in class with a question. "I'm sorry," he says, interrupting an already long story. "But you expect me to believe that people would just help each other like that? No quid pro quo? Neighbors just being neighbors?" Like a cold wave of annoyance, I can feel the irritation in Mayor Lagacé radiating next to me. I completely understand where she's coming from. While she might be looking forward to going home and I'm waiting for the precious information that will make this trip worthwhile, we're both eager to get to the point. A point that Thomas pushes back farther with every question and interruption. Mayor Byrne, however, simply tilts her head like a patient teacher addressing a recalcitrant student. She smiles with just the right amount of condescension before answering. "You'd think that," she says. "But then, back then, cooperation was the foundation of virtue. As I explained before, the community you help one year might be the one that bails you out the next. Our ancestors were clever about it, though. They seldom gave away food and resources. Instead, they would trade, often at a loss, usually for things they didn't really need. It sounds like a question of pride, but there's a practical element to getting some furniture or leatherwork to trade back later." "I'm sorry," I say, surprising myself. "You mentioned something about a year with 2 festivals?" At first, there's no answer to my question. Thomas looks as bothered by my interruption as he looks surprised by it. I might as well be a dog who turned down a piece of raw steak in his eyes. While I wasn't expecting Lagacé to cheer me on, she clicks her tongue in a disapproving manner. She's clearly putting her counterpart's security and comfort above my need for urgency. Byrne, on the other hand, looks disappointed. "I'm sorry," she says. "I do tend to get carried away." No, I say, apologetic. "It's fine. I'm loving this. It's the first time I've been able to hear the origins of Aquilo. I just want to make sure we don't lose track of the story." Byrne nods, not in agreement, but rather as reassurance. "I'm going somewhere with this," she seems to say without words. "Don't listen to her," Thomas says, incapable of not putting in his 2 cents. "This is fascinating. I could listen to this for hours." Mayor Byrne smiles her gratitude at Thomas, but turns back to me. "Thank you, but Miriam is right. I should get to the point." She shuffles in her chair, casting her eyes towards Lagacé as if asking permission to go on. It's difficult to reconcile the image of this Mayor Byrne as a strong demon hunter who closed a hellgate a little over a year ago. I look at her gloved hand with its stiff prosthetic fingers, and her eye, so perfectly crafted that I forget which is made of glass, and try to imagine what it is that she endured. Was she always this way, and it's what led to her injuries? Or has her will been broken by her trials? "The big takeaway," Byrne continues, "is that the people in the area, whatever town they were from, cultivated a sense of flexibility. The isolation, the weather, and, let's face it, the quickly evolving territorial situation in the area demanded that every community roll with the punches. One day the French army is rolling around up north, and the next it's the British trying to stamp out a revolution to the south. Not to mention the all-important religious landscape of the time. Christians of every flavor, Protestants, so-called natural philosophers, native belief systems, all of that clashed in a variety of peaceful and terribly violent ways. All the while, Saint Elodie trying to remain an island of stability, always adapting, always changing to meet the needs of the times. Always rolling with the punches, I think, trying to put the statement into the context of today's Aquilo. Well, during one particular fall, Saint Elodie had 2 harvest festivals. I can't pinpoint the exact year because records are spotty on that point, but there was an early frost that killed a large portion of the crops. Grain was ruined, root vegetables were lost to ice, fruits were frozen on the trees. So the residents went around to neighboring communities, asking for help and inviting these settlements to celebrate the harvest, as it was with them. But the weather had been universally bad for everyone. There would be no respite from helpful neighbors this time around. Everyone would have to tighten their belts and ration their food reserves. After that first festival, things looked dire. That is, until someone tried picking the frozen apples from the orchard and fermenting them into something that might keep during the cold months. Ice cider, I say. They made ice cider. Or a variant, Byrne continues, happy for my enthusiasm. 3 things came of this. First, St. Elodie had a second harvest festival, this time to show off what could be a life-saving solution. Second, the town signed much more formal trade agreements with their neighbors to the south, a loose assortment of farms that went under the name of Nordberg. Those trade agreements grew into the municipal alliance that eventually became the foundations for Aquilo. The third thing is what you came here inquiring about. No one knows how or why, but every year since that fall with 2 festivals, there were lights in the forest, and the people of Aquilo would dance underneath them. It's dark by the time we walk out of City Hall. The mayors stay behind, to lock up, they claim, but I've got a feeling there's more to it than that. Veronique Lagacé and Marie Byrne have things to discuss. I expect that, despite looking like little more than a brief interview, tonight will hold some deep ramifications for them. It'll be a while before I know what that means. I kind of hope I never find out. But I asked for the status quo between City Hall and the Dufour witches to be broken, and Mayor Byrne accepted. I can feel it, deep in my bones, along with the chill of the evening, that this will come back to haunt me. For now, however, it feels like it was all worth it. Finally, after running around in circles for the better part of a week, after errors and judgment and missteps, I have the beginning of a solution. It feels like holding an egg when what I want to serve is a turkey dinner, but it's better than nothing. Thomas is ecstatic. There's a spring in his step that borders on dance, and I can see a tremor under his skin, like water on the point of simmering. His lips twitch and his eyes can't stop flitting in my direction. Even the tips of his fingers on his wounded hand flex with excitement. Out with it, I say, trying to show some good humor. Wait, no, that's not right. I am in good spirits. Great, in fact. I'm smiling as I tell him to spill his guts. Thomas wants to talk. And for the very first time since asking him his order when he walked into the Aquilo Cafe, I want to hear him talk. Eureka? He asks before catching himself. I mean, you've got it figured out, right? We have what we need. I shrug. I know what he means, but I'm not sure I can give him a satisfactory answer. I'm still digesting everything that Marie Byrne divulged to us. It's both a lot and not much at the same time. The history lesson was nice, I suppose. Makes me wonder if I can go back and ask more about Aquilo's past. Does she have details about my ancestors? Would she be so bold as to give me information about this hellgate she lost 2 fingers and an eye trying to close? Does she have more information about who this St. Elodie woman is? The rabbit's hole of facts to explore runs deep, with many tangential warrens branching out. There's no question that Thomas could have stayed in that conference room through the night and more. How much of what he learned will make it into his show? How much can make it in there? I don't know. But his fascination goes beyond the gathering of content. It's that passion of his that probably drove him to record a podcast in the first place. How much do I want him to share with his audience? I don't know, I answer, a little lost in my own thoughts. We know the when of the light summoning. We know the who, but is that enough? Don't we also know the how? Do we? Ice cider, I suppose. That's the secret ingredient. Or is it just apples? Or fermented fruits? Is the cider used as part of something else? I have a hard time keeping the conversation going as my mind's eye is already going through the pages of the Dufour recipe book. I struggle to remember if ice cider is used in any cake or donut or pie that I might have come across. You'd think I'd remember any and every apple-related item, considering my relationship with the figs, but nothing springs to mind. So either it's a recipe that's been modified to accommodate apple cider, or a recipe that was simply never put to paper. Neither is an appealing scenario, as I wouldn't know where to start to find a solution. I'm not sure, I say. I can't think of what recipe I might use ice cider in to summon the dancing lights. This is all too advanced. Bah, you're overthinking it, Thomas says, stepping in front of me and poking my shoulder with his bandaged hand. There's a saying in podcasting that you just have to sit down and do it. Don't shop for the best microphone. Don't plan your t-shirt sales. Just sit down in front of a computer and record your first episode. Jump in and learn to swim as you go. Right, I say, gently pushing his hand away. Maybe that works when putting your UFO theories on the internet, but you know firsthand what happens when you rush this sort of thing. I can't just will dancing lights into being. He stays put, his expression growing more intense. You're wrong, he says, still blocking my way. Fine, maybe you don't just jump in. Maybe you give it a little bit of thought, but you're not going to get anywhere by ruminating until the cows come home. You can't just chew, you'll eventually have to swallow. What a terrible analogy. Disgust must have shown in my face. Thomas doubles down, literally stomping his foot on the sidewalk to make his point, crushing snow under his boot. About a decade ago, I was still trying to get work as a radio DJ, he says, his tone almost angry at the memory. Can you imagine? I wanted to be on the radio when the medium was in freefall. How stupid is that? I'd have done anything. Traffic, weather. I'd have spun oldies at 2 a.m. if given the chance. I studied communications because I had this romantic idea of the radio host from the 60s, but that era was over. My skills were getting rusty. I wasn't getting any experience. Whatever career I dreamed for myself was slipping through my fingers. And that's when I learned about podcasting. Radio stations and talk shows were releasing their episodes on the internet. Fans of video games and sports were rambling on about their opinions, and people would listen. Back then, true crime wasn't the big deal it is today, but I was a big fan of Art Bell and Coast to Coast AM, staying up late, listening to people confess their secret stories. I figured that even if I only got 3 listeners, at least I'd be behind a microphone. At least I'd be keeping my skills sharp. I didn't have a plan or even a goal. That very night, I sat down and recorded the first episode of Stranger Limits. I didn't even know how to put the show online yet. I certainly didn't have an audience or know how to get one, but I jumped in. He takes a breath. It's weird to listen to Thomas try and give a rousing, earnest, and inspirational speech. Jump in, Miriam, he says. Someone else did this first, without a recipe, without a guide, probably without knowing what the exact results would be. Someone dared. They dared and they succeeded. Why would you think you can't? I look away, afraid that he can see the hesitation in my eyes. I failed when making Pfeffernussen and damn near drove you insane. I don't want to fail on that level again. Or worse. He laughs. He laughs in a way that reminds me of Gulliver. Head tilted back, deep-throated, honest laughter. It's as if he's not taking me seriously, and I don't expect that he is. He doesn't understand. You can't compare wanting to be a radio DJ with actual magic. I'm not recording my inner thoughts about Bigfoot. I'm trying to summon a supernatural phenomena to rescue 2 of my friends back from its clutches. Let's just say the odds are a little different. How can you say it didn't work? He asks, waving his bandaged hand in front of my face. You got me to stab myself with a butter knife. He says this with an enthusiastic smile, convinced he's proving his point. But to the couple walking across the street and the woman pushing a cart down the sidewalk, I'm not sure those details register. Shh, can you keep it down? I don't see how that's considered a success in your book. He shakes his head. You don't get it, he explains. Sure, I ran a knife through my hand and it hurt like hell. But I got to be part of something genuinely magical. Between that and seeing those lights, this all makes coming up to Aquila worthwhile. What I mean is, I don't care about the stabbing. But you made me do that by following your instincts and giving into your gut. just like I did when I sat down to record Stranger Limits Episode 1 just a little over a decade ago. Do that again, Miriam Dufour. Do it again, and I'm positive you'll get those lights back. It's not the greatest pep talk, and I'm not going to claim it's what really got me convinced all the way. But I see what he means, and for a split second, I feel like I might owe him for the encouragement. As clumsy as it is and as bad as the parallels are, it might be just what I need to take the plunge and try something a little crazy for once. But then he has to ruin it. And I'll be right there with you, taking notes for what's bound to be the best episode of Stranger Limits on record. I don't get it. Annabelle looks around the kitchen of the Aquilo Cafe. I wonder if she's ever been in a commercial kitchen before. Not that it's that different from what's probably in her home. Except, I guess, it looks a hell of a lot less homey. And everything is double or triple. And I suppose there's some equipment here that only the most passionate amateur baker would own. There's also the vast quantity of ingredients, and I guess it's not that similar to a normal kitchen after all. It's the absolute dead of night on a school day. Having Annabelle here feels a little transgressive. I had to call her long after the sun had set and ask her to make her way down to the cafe, all knowing she'd probably be here for the better part of the night, all without giving her a proper explanation as to what I needed her for. Since Thomas is like a sugared-up toddler at the prospect that he'll be seeing real magic, boy, is he in for disappointment, it means I'll have to be the adult in the room, and the adult decided Annabelle could sleep through class tomorrow. I need your taste buds, I say. I'm good with flavors. Excellent, even. I've had teachers call me exceptional, a super taster. Annabelle nods along to my answer, but I can see the impatience growing on her face. All right, flavor genius, she interrupts. What do you need me for? This. I open the right door to the large refrigerator and pull out a half-finished bottle of Fig's ice cider. I put it on the counter, banging the glass bottom in the process for emphasis. Ms. Fig's cider? She asks, taking the bottle by the neck and leaning it back to read the label. Oh, ice cider. Nice. She pops the cork and takes a quick whiff of the cold liquid. At that temperature, any aroma would be subtle but crisp. But Annabelle seems to pick up on them. She reads them with her nose as I read a book with my eyes, getting a quick idea of the story behind the fragrances. It's very good, I assure her, but I'm not an expert on alcohols. Guessing where I'm going, Annabelle carefully puts the cork back in the neck of the bottle, twisting it down 1/4 of an inch. Neither am I, Miriam, she says, stepping away from the bottle like it's suddenly become radioactive. I make cocktails for people who think Jack Daniels is quality whiskey. I've seen some of these kids put vodka in tap water. If you're looking for a sommelier, I ain't it. I motion for her to wait. Then I pop open the dishwasher and, as expected, I find last night's dishes completely clean and ready to be put away. The joys of working with a reliable employee. There, amid some small saucers and other glasses, are the 2 wine glasses that Olivia and I used, as clean and gleaming as dewdrops. I pull one out and go to the bottle, take out the cork, and pour about 1/2 ounce into the glass. Here. I offer it to Annabelle, noticing at the edge of my peripheral vision that Thomas is extending his hand, expecting the glass to be for him or wanting one of his own. I'm not going to refuse to taste, Annabelle says. But I don't know what you expect. Just taste it. Blue eyes shift between me and the glass, trying to see into each for different reasons. Then, resigning herself to it, Annabelle swirls the golden liquid around in the glass, leaves a thick trail as it circles the bottom and settles quickly back down. It walks the line between syrupy and fluid. She smells it again for good measure before tilting the glass back so the cider drips down to her lips. She doesn't really take a sip, but rather licks at it, savoring whatever details she can from that. Only once satisfied does she empty the glass into her mouth and swirl the content around before swallowing. To be honest, Thomas whispers, leaning in next to me, I don't know what you expect either. Hush, I say. I don't think we get more than one shot at this. The light click of delicate glass on stainless steel tells us that Annabelle has finished with her tasting. She puts the cork back on the bottle again, this time slamming it down with the palm of her hand. So? I ask, hoping and anticipating some revelatory insight from her. Deftly, she takes the bottle by the neck and flips it, letting the bottom land flat in her hand. I fear that, by closing it in such a definitive way, Annabelle is trying to tell us that she's got nothing, that I've misjudged her or allowed my optimism and imagination to get the better of me. There's no insight. She's no budding expert mixologist. She's just a girl who likes to get people drunk with cheap booze at parties. Too warm, she says, walking to the freezer. This needs to be positively cryogenic. With no further ceremony, she puts the bottle of Fig's ice cider in the freezer between 2 tubs of ice cream and shuts the door. It's hours later, after we've poured through damn near half of the Dufour recipe book, when we settled on an apple pie with anise and honey. The recipe was one of Madeline's, I think. It looks fancy for the time, but I can make it fancier with the tools I have today. It has some scribblings in the margins, though nothing that would suggest it could be used to summon lights or anything that special. Clarity of mind seems to be the recommended usage here. Annabelle was fascinated by the glyphs and iconography randomly sketched in and around the list of ingredients. She'd lose her mind if she knew the age of these recipes. Once I explained that I wanted a recipe that would summon the Donselites again, she was adamant that the cider not be part of it. It has to be part of the recipe, I try to explain, but she would have none of it. You're the cooking expert, she replied. So if you want to pour ice cider into a batter and make a cake, have at it. I've no doubt it'll be delicious. But if you're trying to replicate how they consume this at a party... A festival, Thomas corrected. Fine, a festival. Then you need to think of something that goes with ice cider. I shook my head. She was spouting nonsense, and all I was getting was a feeling that I brought her in for nothing. That's not how that works, I said, sounding maybe a little too condescending. Miss Dufour, Miriam, you wanted my opinion on the booze and I gave it. I'm not an expert on alcohol, but I do know a party, or festival. No one is mixing their libations into the pastries if they're out to celebrate. It went against every instinct I have on the subject. It opposed my predilection for cooking and baking my way out of problems. I wanted that ice cider in a donut or in a buttercream. I wanted to boil it and reduce it to a syrup to drizzle on small cakes. But Annabelle was right. I'm not a party expert, and when all is said and done, this isn't about taste anyway. So, under the hungry, curious, and watchful eye of Thomas Sinclair, the two of us made apple hand pies with anise and honey. I couldn't bring myself to let anyone but me handle the really sensitive stuff, so I had Annabelle cut the apples and do some of the hand mixing. I gave her strict instructions to think of the perfect party, the perfect atmosphere, while she stirred. I made sure she used a clockwise motion. We even put on some music of her choice, something the kids would enjoy, something that might have been on Fred Ashton's playlist. I wrote the glyphs, mimicking the layout of a star field and enjoying the memory of sitting with Petunia Marshall under the lights that first night, sipping mango cocktails and drinking hot soup from a thermos. Magic is intent and will, and we filled the kitchen with both as we worked on our recipe. By the time everything was in the oven, you can almost feel the power of what we'd baked permeate the air around us. Or maybe it's just the smell of baking apples and honey. How does this work? Thomas asks. While we baked, he studied. He sat at the counter and watched through the door, taking notes. I should be worried that he's taking such a detailed account of how I work the Dufour magic. In fact, I should feel a little more apprehension that I'm sharing these secrets not only with the podcaster, but with Annabelle, too. Well, I say, taking a look at the timer to make sure I check on the pastries in good time. When no one's messing around with the offering, usually all it takes is for the food to be consumed. He nods, knowingly. In what might pass for an academic fashion, he scribbles some more notes into his book. And, he continues, as serious as I've seen Thomas be, who would you say should be the one to consume said offering? Oh, the gluttonous ones. There's enough pie for all of us, I say, glad to share these tidings of plenty. But not enough cider, Annabelle adds. It took another hour for the pies to be ready. I toyed around with the idea of adding a ball of ice cream or maybe some caramel drizzle or crumble. But that's the baker in me talking, not the witch. With ceremonious care, I put one of the hand pies on a plate over a square napkin. I switch off all the lights in the Aquilo's dining room, letting the blue fluorescent glow from the kitchen be our only illumination. Annabelle takes the second glass from the dishwasher and fills it with ice cider so cold the side of the bottle is frosting over. It feels so simple, yet so solemn. I imagine that this ceremony must have been much different 150 years ago. Dozens of revelers would have been rubbing elbows and celebrating this magical find of fermented frozen fruits. Not us. Under fleeting light, Annabelle and I put forward our bounty to the only guest at this party, Thomas Sinclair. "Why do I feel like a guinea pig?" he asks, a little worry showing between each word. "Because you are," Annabelle assures him. "Now eat up." "You wanted to be part of the magic," I add. "Here you go." This is it. Probably my most ambitious spell yet. Not only did I work with others to achieve this, but it's a completely new idea, an interpretation of what my ancestor did, but for my own purposes. Annabelle watches Thomas eat like she's expecting him to sprout wings. He's a specimen and she's a researcher. What will his reaction be to this experiment? I know better, though. Thomas is a conduit at best. If all goes well, he's not the one we should be watching. I hear him chew and swallow and sip, occasionally slurp. I've no doubt that he will finish the pie to the last crumb and drink the ice cider to the last drop. What I'm waiting for doesn't come from him. The clink of his fork on the ceramic plate and the ruffling of his paper napkin tells me that the meal is done. Thomas has, gladly, done his part. I worry for a moment that maybe the experiment is a failure, but not long enough for the thought to coalesce. The kitchen light seems to fade. The darkness becomes so all-consuming that it swallows even the streetlights from outside. The rest of the effect doesn't wait around before manifesting. Just like in the forest, the floor of my dining room becomes a black ocean, reflecting dim stars from a sky it cannot see. The lights take time to appear, but with each passing second, and as they become more visible, I can feel the excitement of Annabelle and Thomas. The podcaster is almost scrambling not to fall from his chair. Annabelle is no less frantic, jumping up and down in small bursts as she tries to contain the energy. So much for being blasé about magic lights. I wonder what it must look like from the outside. Not enough to go look or even bother checking if anyone on the street can see the phenomenon, but it must have been quite the spectacle. For an hour, colorful orbs of light danced and swirled in the Aquilo Cafe. Never have I thought to see this sort of magic in my dining room. For an hour, Annabelle, Thomas, and I stand, marveling at the miracle we conjured. It's only in the end, when the lights begin to fade, each disappearing one at a time, doing one last twirl above our heads or flying within inches of our faces, that I start to doubt. We did it, didn't we? We got the lights. We succeeded in the summoning and, against all odds, replicated a spell generations old. So, as I watch the darkness slowly encroach once again around us, I can't help but wonder, where are Petunia and Fred? Aquilo is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/Aquilo to donate. Aquilo has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Aquilo for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Aquilo.